The Young and the Restless spoilers next week, July 7th to July 11th, 2025. The air in Genoa City seemed thick with unsaid words, lingering grief, and mounting tension. The events of the past week had left the community reeling. The sudden death of Cole Howard had cast a long shadow over the lives of those who loved him. Claire Grace Newman, who had once shared a bond with him so profound that it seemed unbreakable, was left in a state of emotional freefall. Her heart, already fragile from years of family fractures, had been shattered once more. In the quiet of the Newman estate, the sounds of Claire's heartbroken sobs echoed through the halls. She was alone, surrounded by empty space, her only company the deafening silence of grief. Victoria, too, had been torn apart. As the mother of both Claire and Cole, her world had fractured in a way that was impossible to comprehend. She had watched her son say goodbye. Watched him slip away, not just from the world, but from the grasp of a family that had so desperately clung to him. In the moments following Cole's death, Victoria was left without the strength to even consider the looming responsibilities of the Newman empire. The business, the power, the endless balancing act, it had all paled in comparison to the raw, gut-wrenching pain of losing a child. Her tears had been endless, and now, as she sat alone, struggling to maintain her composure, she couldn't help but wonder who she could turn to. Most of her family had left town, preoccupied with their own personal battles. Nick was lost in his own world, Adam was untouchable, and even her parents were nowhere to be found. Her world had been reduced to fragments, and she needed someone, to hold on to. It was during this fragile moment that Holden Novak, a name that had begun to gain prominence under strange circumstances, appeared by her side. His presence was calm, steady, everything Victoria needed but had been too afraid to ask for. He had reached out to her after Cole's death, offering condolences, then stepping into the role of confidant, someone who listened without judgment. The irony wasn't lost on Victoria. Holden had become an unexpected anchor in the storm, a reminder that not everything in her world had been turned upside down by tragedy. He was still here. His steady gaze never wavered, his words soft and full of care. He was exactly the kind of person Victoria didn't know she needed. But Victoria couldn't ignore the troubling reality. Holden was connected to Kane Ashby. Kane, whose re-emergence in Genoa City had brought nothing but chaos and mystery, had somehow drawn Holden into his web. Victoria didn't know the full extent of Holden's involvement, but as she looked into his eyes, she couldn't help but feel an eerie sense of foreboding. Was he here because he truly cared, or was he another pawn in Kane's game? In the emotional mess that was Victoria's life, it was impossible to tell. Still, she needed someone, and Holden was offering a shoulder to lean on when there were no other options left. Meanwhile, Claire, in her confusion and despair, found herself unable to reach out to anyone else. Her attempts to contact Kyle Abbott had gone unanswered, leaving her feeling even more isolated. Kyle, who had always been there in times of crisis, was no longer in town, gone without a word. Her messages, her calls, her desperate pleas for a response went unreturned, and the uncertainty was beginning to break her. The world felt as though it was closing in on her, and no matter how much she reached out, there was no one to catch her. The realization that Kyle was unreachable made her panic even more. Unable to shake the crushing weight of grief and anxiety, Claire clung to the hope that she could somehow make sense of the messages she hadn't received. She had tried to convince herself that Kyle simply couldn't respond, he had been busy, maybe, or out of reach. But the truth gnawed at her. No one in Genoa City had heard from Kyle. Not even Victor or Nikki. As the days wore on, Claire's grief became a quiet but terrifying storm, and in the absence of the one person she needed, Holden quietly stepped into her life again. He was there when she couldn't sleep, when the sadness felt unbearable, when she needed someone to sit beside her in the silence. Holden's support was unwavering, yet it carried an undercurrent of something else, something Claire couldn't quite place. She found herself turning to him more and more, drawn to the steadiness he provided. But was it kindness, or something else? She didn't know, but right now, she needed comfort. She needed to feel like she wasn't completely alone in this world that had suddenly become too much to bear. Little did she know, Kane Ashby had orchestrated every moment. His agenda had always involved Claire, whether she knew it or not. Kane had watched the way she responded to Holden, observed how easily she had leaned into him for support. Holden was his pawn, and through him, Kane had begun to manipulate her grief, turning it into leverage. The web he had spun was more complicated than anyone could see. It was not just about power, not just about controlling Chancellor or Cassidy first, it was about breaking people down, isolating them, and making them dependent on him. Holden was a tool in that game, but Claire was the prize. Victor Newman, ever the strategist, had already begun to put his own plans into motion. He was never one to sit idly by, and despite his personal turmoil over Cole's death, his mind was working on the next big move. He had never trusted Kane Ashby, and after seeing how much influence Kane had begun to amass in Genoa City, he decided it was time to act. His plan would require Adam's cooperation, no surprise there. But this time, it wouldn't be about business. It would be about domination. Kane, with his enigmatic charm, had been playing a dangerous game, one that Victor couldn't allow to continue unchecked. Kane wanted Chancellor, he wanted Newman, he wanted it all. But Victor wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. Victor's conversations with Adam had already begun, though Adam was less than eager to get involved. But with the looming specter of Kane's manipulation casting a shadow over their family's legacy, Adam was forced to acknowledge that this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about survival. And Victor was about to make a bold move that would either cripple Kane's power or ignite a full-blown war. As the week progressed, the tension in Genoa City continued to escalate. Victoria and Claire were both struggling with their respective losses, while Holden, though seemingly benign, continued to play his part in Kane's complex plan. Chelsea, ever the skeptic, watched from the sidelines, wondering just how far Kane would go to claim control of everything. She had already sensed the danger, but would she be able to stop him before it was too late? In this game of power, manipulation, and grief, one thing was certain, no one was safe. Kane's influence was growing, and those who thought they had the upper hand were about to realize just how much control he had already seized. The stage was set for a showdown that no one could predict. But one thing was clear, in Genoa City, loyalty was a fragile thing, and the consequences of betrayal would be more deadly than anyone could have imagined. The atmosphere in Genoa City had never been this charged, this unpredictable. With each passing day, the undercurrent of power struggles, shifting allegiances, and lurking betrayals grew more palpable. And yet, there was one truth that everyone, from the most seasoned corporate moguls to the youngest heirs, seemed to ignore: no one was as in control as Victor Newman. He had built empires, destroyed rivals, and orchestrated countless moves behind the scenes. And now, as the pieces of a complex chessboard were laid out before him, Victor was preparing to make his next bold move. Adam Newman was the one who would deliver the crucial information. With his mind as sharp as ever, but his heart more fractured than ever before, Adam arrived in Nice, carrying with him secrets that could change everything. His relationship with his father had never been simple, an endless series of betrayals, unspoken grievances, and power struggles. But when Victor called, Adam answered, his loyalty tugging at him despite everything that had come before. They met in a secluded suite, away from prying eyes, as Adam began to lay out the facts for his father. There was no time for niceties, no time for the usual father-son tension. This was business. And it was urgent. Adam's words were precise, his delivery unwavering, as he informed Victor of the various properties being acquired under Kane Ashby's newly adopted identity. The acquisition was expansive, spanning continents, shifting hands, and quietly undermining the assets of Newman Enterprises. The most important of these acquisitions, however, was GCAC, the Genoa City Athletic Club. It wasn't just another property. It was a symbol, a centerpiece in a battle for control of the city's power structure. Victor listened intently, processing the information with his usual cold detachment. He had known Kane was a player, but now the scope of his intentions was becoming clear. Kane wasn't just building a business empire. He was laying the groundwork for something much more dangerous, a full-fledged takeover. And worse, he was operating under the radar, manipulating people and pulling strings from the shadows, much like Victor himself had done for years. Kane's ambition could not be ignored. It had to be contained swiftly, decisively. But that wasn't all Adam had to share. With a sense of urgency in his voice, he continued. He spoke of Chelsea Lawson, the woman who had once been his, and now, increasingly entangled in the web that Kane had woven. Chelsea had met with Kane recently, and Adam had overheard a conversation that sent shivers down his spine. Kane was no longer simply a businessman. He was becoming something else, something more dangerous. And Chelsea, despite her previous reservations, seemed to be playing along, whether out of necessity or manipulation. That conversation was disturbing, Father, Adam said, his voice low. Chelsea's not just helping him. She's caught up in something bigger. And I don't think she knows just how deep this goes. Victor's steely eyes narrowed. He wasn't surprised by Adam's assessment. The warning signs had been there, but Adam's confirmation only fueled the fire of his growing concern. Victor's mind was already spinning, calculating. Kane's plans had just expanded, and with Chelsea unknowingly involved, things were moving faster than expected. Adam's information wasn't just a warning, it was a call to action. Kane's time in Genoa City was quickly running out. The question wasn't whether Victor would make a move. It was when, and with what force. Meanwhile, the scene in Nice had taken a darker turn. The guests at Kane's estate had all been wondering the same thing. Where had Kane gone? After the shocking events that had unfolded, the one question that remained unanswered was why Kane had suddenly disappeared without a word. The confusion grew as time passed. Kane had arrived in Nice with a sense of purpose, but now it seemed like he had abandoned them without explanation. Why? What had happened? What was his plan? And then, the most disturbing thought crossed some of the guests' minds. Could he be in danger? Had he been the target of some sort of conspiracy, or worse, an assassination attempt? The tension in the house was palpable. Whispers turned to outright panic as they realized the implications of the situation. Kane was not just a businessman, they had all seen the power he wielded. But someone had been watching him closely, and now, it seemed like someone was about to strike. Kane was not unaware of the danger that loomed. He had spent his entire life building up an empire, one that relied on secrecy and manipulation. He knew how to stay hidden, how to maneuver behind the scenes. But the fact that he had become the target of an unknown enemy was more than just a surprise, it was a warning. He wasn't just playing a game anymore. He was in a war. Back in Genoa City, Phyllis Summers had her suspicions. Kane Ashby, with his carefully curated image of a legitimate businessman, was a master manipulator. But Phyllis was no stranger to the art of deception. She had seen it all before, and this time, something about Kane's sudden disappearance felt off. Phyllis began her investigation, digging into his activities, his connections, and his dealings. What she uncovered only confirmed her worst fears. Kane's motives were more dangerous than anyone realized. As Phyllis began questioning those who had been close to Kane, her investigation led her straight to a confrontation. She wasn't afraid to push boundaries, and she wasn't afraid to make enemies. Kane would have to answer her questions, whether he liked it or not. The showdown between them was inevitable, and it promised to be one of the most explosive moments in the unfolding saga. But just as things seemed to reach a boiling point, another twist loomed on the horizon. Kane had already set in motion a series of events that no one, least of all the people he had crossed, could have anticipated. Damien Kane, a man whose presence in Genoa City had already raised eyebrows, had been circling the edges of Kane's empire. And now, Damien's involvement in the situation had taken a sinister turn. A confrontation was imminent, and with it came the threat of violence. Kane's worst nightmare was about to unfold. He had made enemies, and one of them was ready to strike. Damien was no fool. He had knives, literal and metaphorical, and his vendetta against Kane was personal. The stakes were higher than ever, and the question now was not just who would emerge victorious, but who would survive. In the quiet hours before the storm, Kane's mind raced. Had he underestimated his enemies? Had he let his guard down? The answers to those questions would come soon enough. But for now, all Kane could do was prepare for the worst. Because when the storm hit, no one would be spared. In the quiet of night, Kane's plan was already taking shape. But so was Victor's. Both men were preparing for a confrontation. And in Genoa City, Phyllis, Chance, and the rest of the key players would find themselves caught in a web they hadn't seen coming. Kane's empire was about to collapse, but who would be the one to pull the strings, and who would be left standing in the wreckage? The answers would be revealed soon. But not before the stakes grew impossibly higher.